Did you know Henry VI's aunt was imprisoned for necromancy? Meet Eleanor, the Duchess of Gloucester, the wife of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, thus the sister-in-law of Henry V, and thus the aunt of Henry VI. And this is her story. Must be the season of the wind. The early life of Eleanor isn't known. We don't even have a birth date for her, but it's thought to have been around the year 1400. She came from a prestigious family. Her father, Reginald Cobham, was a knight. She was named after her mother, Eleanor Culpeper, and if you know the Tudors, you are definitely familiar with the surname Culpeper. In around 1422, Eleanor's father arranged for her to become a lady-in-waiting to Jacqueline de Hainault. Jacqueline had come to England to escape her husband, the Duke of Brabant, who she was in the midst of divorcing. Once her divorce was finalised, she arranged a marriage with the Duke of Gloucester, Humphrey. We don't know when precisely Eleanor became Humphrey's mistress. Evidence shows that 2 years later their affair was active. It seems Humphrey had done the husbandly duty of going to Hainault to gain control of his wife's estate, and then coming home and sleeping with her lady-in-waiting. Lovely men. Jacqueline is definitely a casualty at the start of all this, because just 5 years into her marriage, in 1428, it was annulled, and very shortly after, Eleanor got her wedding to Humphrey. Now this was quite a climbing of ranks for Eleanor. She was now a duchess, and her husband was the regent for the child king, Henry VI. Saying that sounds like he had a lot more control than he actually did, but that's a story for another time. She also seems to have had a good relationship with her kingly nephew. This was all to be ruined, and seems to have been ruined by the fact that she was desperate for a child. After 13 years of marriage, Humphrey and Eleanor still didn't have any children, and Eleanor most likely would have blamed herself. For while she had never conceived, her husband did have bastard children that were likely born before their marriage. Both desperate and hopeful for a child, Eleanor began to consult astrologers. But specifically, she used the astrologers as soothsayers to predict the future. 2 of the confirmed astrologers are Roger Bolingbroke and Thomas Southwell. We do not know if they ever predicted that she would have a child. But one prediction that they did make was that Henry VI was going to suffer with a dreadful illness that very year. And we will come back to that. Besides visiting soothsayers, Eleanor also visited a lady named Marjorie Jourdain, the Witch of Eye. From Marjorie, Eleanor purchased potions that would hopefully help her conceive. Fortunately for Eleanor, it seems she couldn't keep her mouth shut, and she had told someone about the soothsayer's predictions. Of course, Henry VI caught wind of these rumours, and he was terrified. Thus his guardians ordered their own astrologers to make their own predictions about whether he would get ill, and they said, "No, my lord, you will be fine." Now the king was calmed. They began to investigate the source of the rumours, and it quickly led back to Southwell and Bolingbroke. But it also led back to Eleanor's confessor, who had very much failed his own job. What do you do when you can't even trust your confessor? Naturally, Eleanor was quite aware of the investigations very early on, and had taken sanctuary in Westminster Abbey. Upon finding out that she was at the centre of all this, they found a way to get around her sanctuary. She was to be judged by the ecclesiastics rather than the general jury. Eleanor denied everything, except for buying potions for Marjorie, which she did explain that it was because she was desperate for a baby. Thus, everyone was judged to be guilty. Astrologer Roger Bolingbroke was hung, drawn and quartered, while Southwell is listed as just dying in the Tower of London. It's worth noting that Southwell was also Eleanor's physician, and it has been speculated that Southwell and Marjorie may have been linked. Marjorie deserves an episode all of her own. But she was charged with witchcraft, and this wasn't actually the first time she'd been charged, but it be the last. Marjorie was burnt at the stake at Smithfield Market on the 27th of October 1441. Now Eleanor didn't receive the death penalty. Instead, they annulled her marriage to Humphrey, stripped her of her lands and her title, Her second punishment was humiliation. On 3 different market days chosen because it was the busiest day of the week, she was to walk barefooted to 3 different churches. And her final punishment was imprisonment. And for the first 4 years, she was moved numerous times. After this, she was imprisoned for 3 years in the Isle of Man before being moved one last time. March 1449, she was moved to Beaumaris Castle, where she'd remain for the next 3 years. She would die there, still imprisoned, on the 7th of July, 1452. She was herself about 52 years old. Side note, it has been suggested that Humphrey's 2 illegitimate children may have actually been with Eleanor's 2 children are known as Arthur and Antigone Plantagenet, and their mother is not known. There is a contemporary source for Antigone that lists her as a biological child and thus a bastard, but this dates to after Humphrey and Eleanor's annulment. So if she was Eleanor's daughter, it would have meant that she was illegitimized after the annulment. Also noted that both children would have likely have been born several years before Eleanor and Humphrey married. Not impossible, but there's very little evidence. If you enjoy my HERstory series, you'll be very happy to know that I'm starting a podcast. There you will find HERstories with much more thorough detail. In TikToks, I have to simplify someone's life to 5 minutes, or make them 2 or 3 parters, which creates an issue with consistency. Follow Historyoncrack on Spotify.